Hi Real Life Youth. If we haven't met before, my name is Gemma and I lead the youth team at Real Life Church. This morning I'm going to be taking us through week 4 of our series, Hope is Alive. This morning we're looking at the character of Moses and an incredible story where God does something impossible. I really want to encourage you this morning to listen with your spiritual ears open, because I know that God has things that he wants to say to us. So in this video you will find a game that you can choose to play, the signs to practice, the Bible story being read, my teaching points on Moses, a craft that you can choose to make, and a challenge for you to have a go at this week to help you keep your hope alive. I hope you enjoy looking at the story of Moses with me. Today's game is indoor tennis, and to play along you will need a plastic plate to use as a bat. Real Life Youth, if you don't have a plastic plate then you could use a book instead, it will work just as well. And you will also need an indoor ball, something like this. The aim of the game is to use your bat to hit your ball to a partner and see how many times you can hit it backwards and forwards without your ball touching the floor. At early years you might like to try this using a balloon to make it a bit easier. Here we go. You could use a ball like this. If you make the ball smaller, then it gets a little bit more challenging. Real Life Youth, you could even scrunch up some tinfoil and use that as your ball. I hope you have lots of fun playing indoor tennis this morning.
Good morning Real Life kids and youth. My name is Manny, and this morning I'm going to be reading a passage from the Jesus Storybook Bible. And I'm going to be reading about God Makes a Way, which is talking about Moses and the Red Sea from Exodus 14:15. Cool, let's get into it. God makes a way. Moses and God's people escaped out of Egypt and into the wilderness, but they didn't know the way. But God knew the way, and he would show them. I will bring you to a new home, a special land, God promised. I will look after you. I am with you. God sent a big cloud for them to follow, a pillar of smoke stretching up to the sky. It moved in front of them as they walked and shaded them from the blazing heat of the day. And when it was time to rest, it stopped. All through the cold desert nights, it kept them warm, glowing like a fire. God led his people through the desert to the edge of a great sea. They were just wondering how to cross it when suddenly they heard a terrible thundering and pounding. It sounded almost like horses' hooves. They shaded their eyes to look back and screamed. It was Pharaoh and his army were coming to get them. Pharaoh had changed his mind again. Get my slaves back, he screeched, and charged out into the desert after them with 600 of his fastest horsemen and every single chariot in Egypt. What were God's people going to do? In front of them was a big sea. It was so big, there was no way around it. But there was no way through it. It was too deep. They didn't have any boats, so they couldn't sail across. And they couldn't swim across because it was too far and they would drown. And they couldn't turn back because Pharaoh was chasing them. They could see the flashing swords now, glinting in the baking sun, and the dust clouds, and chariot after scary chariot surging towards them. So they did the only thing there was left to do. Panic! We're going to die, they shrieked. Don't be afraid, Moses said. But there's nothing we can do, they screamed. God knows you can't do anything, Moses said. God will do it for you. Trust him and watch. But there's no way out, they cried. God will make a way, Moses said. Another minute and it would have been over. God made the pillar of smoke. It moved behind his people and hid them from the Egyptians. Then God sent a strong east wind to blow all night long. It blew on the water of the big sea. It blew it to the left and it blew it to the right, until it blew it into two towering walls of water. And there, right through the middle of the sea, a muddy pathway opened up. And God's people walked across dry land. When the Egyptians tried to follow, the walls of water crashed back down on them and swallowed them up. God's people were safe. They danced and laughed and sang and thanked God. When there had been no way out, God had made a way. Many years later, once again, God was going to make a way where there was no way. From the beginning, God's children had been running from him and hiding. God knew his children could never be happy without him, but they couldn't get back to him by themselves. They were lost. They didn't know the way back, but God knew the way, and one day he would show them. Thank you.
Hope is alive.
In the story that we just heard, Moses and the people of God faced an impossible situation. In front of them, they've got the vast Red Sea with no way to get across. And then behind them, they've got an angry Pharaoh and his army thundering towards them on their horses and their chariots. It's an impossible situation. That story is part of a bigger story in the book of Exodus in the Bible. And earlier in that story, God had promised that he was going to rescue his people from Egypt. God had promised Moses that he was going to set his people free from slavery. But now it looks like that isn't going to happen. The situation looks hopeless. So what do the people do? Well, the story tells us that the people cried out to God and they panicked. I think I probably would have done the same in their situation. But Moses doesn't. Moses trusts God and he trusts God's promises. He says to the people, don't be afraid, God will fight for you. Moses listens to God and he does what God tells him to do. And what does God do? Something incredible. He parts the Red Sea and makes a path for the people to walk straight through the middle on dry ground. God makes a way where there was no way. God did something that was impossible. When there was no way, when the situation seemed hopeless, God made a way. So when we can't see a way through a situation, when something seems hopeless, we can ask God to do the impossible, because nothing is impossible for God. The story also teaches us that God always keeps his promises. He promised to set the people free from slavery, and that is exactly what he did. Like Moses, we need to remember God's promises. The Bible is full of promises that God makes to his people. So we can read them, we can learn them, we can stick them up around our room and make sure that we get them inside of us. And then we can ask God for them. We can pray God's promises back to him. In the story, God made a way where there was no way. And years later, God made a way for his people to come back to him by sending his son Jesus to earth, so that whoever believes in Jesus can become part of God's family forever. God made a way where there was no way. Each week we have been setting you a challenge or an activity to try to help you keep your hope alive. So this week your challenge is to take a photograph of something that makes you feel hopeful or fills you with wonder. Try and get outside into nature and do this if you can. So it might be a picture of the tallest tree that you can find in the woods. or a picture of the tiniest bug that you can find in your garden, or maybe a picture of the detail in a spider's web. It could be a photograph of your favourite place to play. So your challenge for today is to get outside and take a photograph of something that makes you feel hopeful. Bye.